Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my dominant hair and seniors and senoritas, comic book fans from around the world, welcome once again to Ask Chuck Dixon. And prepare, because I have a special announcement. This channel will no longer feature ads. I'm getting rid of the ads. As of this episode, it's official, but I'm going back and removing ads from all the previous episodes as well. Because the money I make from Google off of the ads is a pittance. And it's not worth that pittance to annoy the hell out of you with yet another advertisement for erectile dysfunction, or a movie you don't want to see, or a TV show you don't care about, or some guy telling you that if you stop eating bananas, you'll live 10 years longer. You don't need that. I don't need that. Google doesn't need my money. They don't need me to make any money for them. So no more ads. Screw them. I'm going the other way. Netflix, all the other people, Disney Plus, they're all adding commercials. I'm getting rid of mine. Because, why should I be part of the problem? So from there, let's go to our first question. Philip Russert asks, where do you see mainstream comic book publishing in 5 years? And will the indie scene ever become a large enough portion of the industry pie to be taken seriously? Well, Marvel and DC at this point are pretty much made themselves irrelevant. Their market share of overall American comic sales is so small. And they no longer lift all boats at the comic shops. We see more and more comic shops going out of business. Comic shops, the only successful comic shops that I know of are comic shops that no longer sell new comics. They just sell back issues and tchotchkes and Funko Pops. So we're in a new era. It's like everything else, the coming economic crisis. It's not coming, we're in it. World War III, we're in it. It's happening now. So, where are we going to be 5 years from now? Who knows? Who knows where we're going to be 5 years from now? But, independent creators, crowdfunders, just individuals. I mean, Rippaverse, Eric's built a crew of writers and a team of artists to produce, high-level stuff. I'm excited. My next project from them is The Horseman, a character me and Joe Bennett created for the Rippaverse, and we're really excited about this. We think this is going to be a huge deal. And a follow-up to Alpha Core that we're hoping is even more successful than Alpha Core was, and Alpha Core was pretty damn successful. We sold a lot of books. Rippaverse sells a lot of books. If the crowdfunding people, like Rippaverse and Graham Nolan and others were included in those pie charts, crowdfunding would have a significant portion of market share. And so it's already happening. The revolution has not only begun, it's in its third or fourth year, maybe even more than that. I mean, I recently did a book with Richard Meyer and Matt Barr, Rock and Roll Ninja, and it's the best received book that Splato has ever put out, and they've put out some really high-level, high-profile books, but this one has been the most well-received, and it's very encouraging for everyone in the independent market. And the most important thing is that we're reaching an audience, not an audience, an imaginary audience that we wish we could reach, but we're reaching the vast, underserved populace of comic book readers who still want to read comics, but they don't see a whole lot of output from the majors, like Marvel and DC. And quite honestly, they don't see a whole lot of output from the larger independents like IDW and Dark Horse that they want to see either. Those smaller independent companies they're in the same rut as Marvel and DC are, and trying to figure out a way out of it, and it ain't happening. So it's really like the music industry. It's all broken up. I call it the garage band era of comics, but much more successful than garage bands. Crowdfunders raising in excess of $1 million on average, particularly at Rippaverse. Uh, Comic book creators making as good or a better living now than they were at the height of their careers at the majors. And they're doing it all on their own. They don't have a boss. They don't need permission to draw. They don't need permission to write. And it's a great day. It's a great day. Now, if we can only get out of, and with the help of SpinRack, I'm hoping this will happen, we can get out of the digital comics ghetto that is comicology. Where Amazon basically took the burgeoning, growing audience for digital comics and strangled it in its crib. Because that's what Amazon does to everybody. They swallow up their competitors and then bury them. So we're going to break out of that. We're all going to do it together. You and me. Creators and fans together. M. Anthony Swan. What is something everyone gets wrong about comics? The greatest misconceptions about the medium itself or one of the characters. Well, one that's dogged us from the beginning is that comics are just for kids, that the medium is just for kids. Not just the comics, but the medium itself. And there's still that stigma. We still, Marvel and DC dream of that hipster audience where most of their comics are sold to 20-somethings who live below 14th Street in Manhattan. That's never going to happen. And so we have to break that stigma, and maybe breaking that stigma is breaking format. The other thing is, hold on, I got a little ahead of myself. We got to get female readership back. And the big two thought that female readership, the way to get them back was to do a lot of girl power comics. The poorly crafted books where, Mary Sue characters rise unchallenged to show men how to do it and fight the patriarchy or whatever. And apparently that didn't work. And what's the reason we got to get girls back? Not because they were once half of the comic book readership. They were more like 75% of the comic book readership. The misconception about American comics is that it's always been a boys' medium is simply not true. It wasn't true until the 80s. Girls were buying comics. They liked comics. And they were buying millions of comics. The best-selling comic books were either aimed at girls or had elements in them that appealed to girls. And so that a majority of the readership was girls. I still say to this day, the success of the X-Men was largely because it was a girl-friendly comic. There were a lot of interesting, engaging female characters, and there was just enough of the romance, boy-girl stuff that girls like to read, and also complex plot lines and complex character relationships, kind of stuff girls like to read, and guys say they don't like to read, but they do. And as I said before, got to think about breaking format. The day of the comic book pamphlet is over. It's over. Now, manga has no problem. For some reason, manga doesn't have the stigma of being just for kids. You got 20-somethings and 30-somethings. They're cool with reading manga. They don't mind reading manga, whereas they might not want to be seen reading a pamphlet comic. So there's that stigma, but manga's shown the way. So once again, formatting. I keep saying, let's change up the formatting. And it's only in the United States, this attitude about comics are for kids, comics are a juvenile medium. We don't see this in Asia, and we certainly don't see it in Europe, where comics are still thriving, comics are still selling. Not at the numbers they were before, but they have not taken the precipitous fall that American comics have taken. And they still have a large, robust market for comics for all ages, all the way up to adult. And you don't, in Europe, they did plateau marketing, what Stan Lee used to preach in the 70s, back when he was editor-in-chief at Marvel, that you don't grow your characters up with your fan base. You present your fan base with new characters that will appeal to them as they get older. I mean, Stan's idea was that you would graduate from the Fantastic Four to Savage Sword of Conan, or the black and white horror comics, or Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, which are written for an older audience and in a magazine format that looked so much like a comic. Had a painted cover, slick cover, looked real cool. Didn't look so much like a comic. So, there's a lot of ways to do this, but, nobody's ever really made an effort to remove that stigma and find a new audience. The only effort, as I often point out, in recent decades was Vertigo. Vertigo tried to reach out to an older audience, a new audience. I think if Vertigo had played around with format more, they would have been even more successful, but you can't take it away. Vertigo was successful. It sold. It was a profitable division for DC Comics until a certain editor-in-chief and publisher came along who hated Vertigo and got rid of it simply because he didn't like it. I didn't like it either. I didn't buy any Vertigo comics. I didn't even read Vertigo comics when they came in the comps when I was working at DC. But they weren't for me. They were for another audience. And I still hail them as a huge success, even though I didn't particularly like them. But as I said, they weren't tailored for me. They were tailored for, I think, freshman college students after they had their first beer. Anyway, let's move on to subscribe. Have you subscribed? Please subscribe. I earned it. I'm not going to have ads here anymore. So reward me with your subscription. Hit that button, smash it, crush it. Help grow this channel. Drew Geraci, my buddy Drewby. If you could write, direct an MCU movie, God, why? Oh my God, you're cursing me. Like their early movies that had little interference, which characters would you like to do? Also, which DC movie would you like to get your grubby mitts on? I'll tell you, it's pretty easy pickings for me. I'd make a Captain America movie entirely set in World War II. I mean, just like a Where Eagles Dare kind of movie with Cap. And just to make sure it made money, I throw Wolverine in, because remember, Wolverine was around then. Wolverine, Canadian Commando, Weapon X, whatever. And just to make sure that everybody loved the movie, I'd have Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos in one form or another show up in this flick as well. And it would just be Cap versus Nazis. I mean, it's a perfect formula. As far as DCU, I don't think there's any of them I would touch. They wouldn't interest me as cinematic creations. Writing them as comic characters, yeah, I dig that. I just don't. I don't think I would be given the free rein to do the kind of comic book movie I'd want to do. Not to say that any of these things would be successful, but I'd have fun. Actually, I wouldn't have fun. Directing is very, very hard work. Very, very frustrating. I want to stay as far from the film business as possible in a hands-on way. I like their money. I don't want to get involved. David Jordan. I don't know if you're a big H.P. Lovecraft fan or not, but if so, have you read any of the stuff by authors that carried on his cosmic horror world? I don't particularly mean his contemporaries like Robert Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, etc., but people that did it in the decades after. What authors and books would you recommend? For me, Lovecraft is like Tolkien. He's kind of the last word on his genre. I don't know why anybody else would want to try and replicate what he did. That said, I've definitely thrown some Lovecraftian horror elements into both my Conan comic stories and my Conan prose novels. But I'm not writing a Lovecraft story. I'm just using his brand of horror with which is perfect fit for Conan. We have to assume Conan, and I think Howard assumed this as well, because he was part, as you mentioned, part of the Lovecraft circle. I think Howard considered Conan to live in a shared universe with Lovecraft's cosmic gods. But I don't understand why anybody would write beyond that. Now, I did try, because I read all of Lovecraft and reread all of Lovecraft and was really immersed in Lovecraft and loved Lovecraft and really, I think, learned a lot about purple prose and writing horror from him. And of course, your imagination just goes crazy when you read that stuff. And I tried reading others. I tried reading some Robert Bloch. I tried reading Brian Lumley later on in I believe the 70s, and it just wasn't the same. It was just an obvious pastiche, an obvious. I'm saying this as someone who's written, pastiche Lovecraft. But I'm writing it in the midst of an adventure story. But to write a straight up horror story, it just seems like Lovecraft nailed it. There's no reason to. It'd be like writing a Jack London pastiche. I mean, how can you possibly capture entirely that lightning in the bottle that was Jack London? Because he was writing from his own experiences and everything else, and Lovecraft is writing from but the twisted imagination of his. And I don't think it's possible to replicate that. Hey, twin spin. Lucky you, David. On your newest Ask Chuck Dixon and in ones before as well on your Facebook pages, you've talked about your love of French cinema. So because of that, and because you're on the same page as me on a lot of things, I want to ask, what movies of the French New Wave movement are legitimately good? It's a movement of film that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, mainly due to those that champion it. I've seen some of Truffaut, which I liked, and Godard, which I didn't. And I've seen a good bit of Melville, too. I don't know if he was part of that scene. Yeah, a lot of... I don't get Godard. I get why like cinematographers and actual film directors were excited because he was doing stuff, but I think it was stuff only they could appreciate. And then you had a bunch of film intellectual eggheads who had to pretend they liked it too. So yeah, I don't really get it. I don't, for a large part, get Francois Truffaut either. Truffaut of Amos famously had an extended interview with Alfred Hitchcock, which ended up in a thick book. I mean, they talked for, I assume, days. I mean, it wasn't a continuous hours-long interview with Hitchcock, although he was perfectly capable of talking that long. And Truffaut asked, Hitchcock a lot of great questions that get Hitchcock to talk about his process and his style and his approach to filmmaking and all the rest of it. And then Truffaut makes his own Hitchcock homage, The Bride Wore Black, and it sucked. It absolutely sucked. There was nothing Hitchcock about it. It was slow and boring, and there was none of the cleverness or dark humor or anything else that would be in Hitchcock film. So it's like, how could you talk to this guy literally for days about filmmaking and then go make a movie that is a tribute to him that is totally unlike anything that he would ever do? And most of Truffaut's work leaves me cold. It just seems like he just let the camera on and let the actors do whatever the hell they want. And a lot of his movies are slow and boring. That said, Story of Adele H, I really like. I do like that movie. It's slow and boring too, but there's something about it. Now, as far as other French New Wave guys, you got Louis Malle. Louis Malle, Thief of Paris. He came here to the United States and directed Pretty Baby in Atlantic City. I mean, this guy had all the chops. And he made his own Hitchcock film, his own Hitchcock homage, Elevator to the Gallows. And I think he did it just to show, hey, I understand Hitchcock. I get it. And it's a terrific thriller with amazing suspense moments and fantastic imagery. It's everything Hitchcock. There's the dry humor and sort of wicked cynicism of Hitchcock, and a perfect example. So he's a new wave guy that I liked because he wanted to entertain audiences. I don't think Godard gave a damn about audiences. I think he cared more about the critics. And I mentioned Claude Chabrol, who's considered a new wave director, surprisingly still considered a new wave director, even though he pretty much embraced every genre going and was prolific. Most new wave directors were not as prolific as this guy. This guy made a movie a year for 50 years. And as I mentioned before, I'm trying to watch all of them. I'm trying to watch all 50 of his films. I think I'm well past the halfway mark. But this guy directed Hitchcockian type thrillers. He directed spy parodies and political thrillers and comedies and straight up crime flicks. And, he just directed basically anything you can think of. I'm surprised he didn't get into animation. He just seemed to want to explore almost every genre. He never made a Western that I'm aware of. But, he's a guy that got it, that he knew what audiences wanted to see. Even though he had a lot of different approaches to things. And he had, there's a Chabrol touch when you watch the movie that you can see, oh, this is a Chabrol movie, because he does a lot of visual puns and visual symbolism that's not there to be artsy. It's there to make you laugh. And, oh yeah, okay, she's behind a spider web because she's trapped. That kind of thing. That kind of like Soviet film realism he was poking fun at. Now you mentioned Jean-Pierre Melville. This guy was a new wave director and definitely embraced a new way of looking at things, a new approach to filmmaking. And this is probably the most influential of all of those guys. I mean, with movies like Les Samurai and Cercle Rouge, and these other thrillers with Belmondo and Alain Delon and Lino Ventura, their crime films. Huge influence on filmmakers like Michael Mann, Tarantino, William Friedkin, John Woo. I mean, John Woo's The Killer is a Hong Kong version of a Jean-Pierre Melville story. If you've never seen one of these, you really need to check them out. They're like super cool about hitmen and heistmen and everything else. The criminal class in Paris and Marseille. And they're always visually striking and well done. And like I said, just these characters are just cooler than cool. They're all, Steve McQueen type characters, just going through life, killing and loving their way from one end of France to the other. Mattel Jones. I've always enjoyed Lee Falk's character, the Phantom, which is said to be such a major inspiration in the development of comic book costume crime fighters. Although in the USA, the character may now have more of a niche following. The Phantom seems to remain quite popular in parts of Europe, Australia, big time, and elsewhere. What do you think accounts for this? Is it the marketing efforts of King Features, the fact that his adventures mostly occur outside of North America, or something else? I don't, the Phantom was big here in the United States, but for some reason, Australia, and especially Sweden, this went nuts for the Phantom. You have monthly Phantom comics continuing. I know guys, like Alex Saviuk and stuff like that, who worked on the Phantom comics. Quite a few American comic book guys ended up doing comics for Semic in Sweden. And why wasn't it popular here? I think largely because the only comic books done of the Phantom were Adele and Gold Key. And when they stopped doing them, they just stopped doing them. And they didn't do that many Phantom comics. Charlton did it for a while with some degree of success. And the character just sort of dies away here for whatever reason. If it's disinterest from publishers, disinterest from editors, every once in a while there would be an attempt to bring the character back, and it didn't work. I think characters like this for the American audience are just from a bygone era. Characters like, sadly, Tarzan, one of my favorite fictional characters, is just sort of irrelevant now. And part of the problem for me when I was a kid with the Phantom was I couldn't understand where the stories were set. They weren't. It wasn't until years later I realized they're not set in a mythical or fictional African jungle. They're set in a mythical, fictional Indian jungle, which I didn't quite get until years later, that he was in a entirely made-up country. But I never glommed onto the Phantom, although I got to work on the Phantom a few times. Well, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Where's that in? There we go. My good buddy Graham, huge Phantom fan. And he and I worked a couple of times on the Phantom. We did a one-shot Phantom Western story for Moonstone. And we also did a set of trading cards for an Australian comic publisher featuring the Phantom. So I have done a little bit of work. And I did a one-shot issue for Moonstone as well. I can't remember who drew that. He's a good artist. He's a good artist too, but I can't remember who drew that. And but let me look for my images here. Hold on. I have to mix everything up. Yeah, the Phantom. I don't know how many papers the Phantom Daily and Sunday are in. I can't imagine it's too many. But another weird intersection in my life with the Phantom is that the Phantom Daily and Sunday strips are currently written by a high school friend of mine who I didn't even realize had any interest in comics, and he ended up getting the gig. He was Tony DePaul started as a newspaper reporter. He may still be doing news journalism, I'm not sure, and then just sort of moved into writing Phantom comics. It's kind of cool. Okay, Remy Wilkins, you created a lot of characters, but which characters did you have the most input on their costumes? Well, I mean, most recently, the Horseman. I worked with Joe Bennett. He sent me initial sketches. I mean, when I'm creating a new character in the script, I describe them as best I can, what I think their costume should look like. And then, of course, Joe goes nuts and does a whole bunch of model sheets and style guides. And then we sort of pick and choose between them. Like, I like this helmet. I like this shoulder armor. These boots are cool. And just go from there. So, there's a bit back and forth, just as there was with Graham and I on Bane, just as there was on, a bunch of characters. But largely, I leave the costuming up to the artist. I really don't. Beyond a couple of suggestions, I really don't. And most times it works out really cool. And sometimes it doesn't, and it's a little disappointing. Like, what were you thinking? This character doesn't look quite as menacing as I thought. He looks a little fey. But that said, I mean, I've had some direct hands-on. This was my sketch for Graham Nolan of what I thought the new Firefly costume should look like. If you've never seen the original Firefly Batman villain from the 1950s, look him up. His costume was idiotic. And I wanted to bring the character back. I really wanted to do a pyromaniac, fire-themed villain. So I brought back Firefly. And as Graham and I live to regret, we wish we renamed him. Since we changed his appearance entirely, should have renamed him so we could have gotten money from all the toys they made of him. But we weren't thinking of that. We were just thinking of what's best for Batman. Oh, twin spin, another twin spin. Okay. Remy Wilkins again. Generating villains for Batman must be fun and of necessity throwaway. But have there been throwaway one-use villains that you later realize have more depth and bring them back? When I was on Nightwing, I created a lot of villains because basically DC said anything you create, you get a piece of. And Nightwing needed his own rogues gallery. I just didn't want him having going up against Batman villains because they get enough exposure in the Batman comics. I want a new city, new bunch of villains. So Lady Vic was one of the ones that I really thought was cool. I really like this character. She's a actual titled, noble woman from England who makes her money on the side, hunting men, hitman, bounty hunter, or whatever. And I just thought she was a really cool character. Great foil for Nightwing. I always like Nightwing to have feminine foils, so there's a little bit of that boy-girl stuff going on there. And another villain that I was really happy with that really to me was a one-off, but then took on a life of his own, was Tad Ryerstad, the Nightwing, the imitation Nightwing, the sad wannabe vigilante who was really a villain in every way. He took mass crime fighting to a more dangerous and sadistic level than either Nightwing or Batman approved of. But that was a character with real legs that I really liked, and he grew on me. So over time, I used him more and more often, and exploring his characterization and why he was the way he was, and everything else. Another one was Mickey Fondazzi. Mickey Fondazzi was created as a one-off in the. He's not really a villain, not really a good guy either. low-level mafia soldier who will never get made because he's not Italian, he's Albanian, sort of a poor soul kind of character who gets used and abused by Frank Castle. And I created him as a device, plot device for the first arc on Punisher Warzone, but then I really liked him. I really thought, well, this is a convenient character because, whenever Frank wants to know anything mafia related, he can always go scare the wits out of this guy and get what he wants. So I really saw him very much like the character Angel on Rockford Files. So he grew to have a life of his own, and I liked keeping him around. Triple spin, woohoo! Remy Wilkins again. I was reading 52 Weeks recently and saw the house ad for Rush City, which I'd never heard of. What was the story behind that pitch? Do you own the rights to it, and would you consider writing more? I do not own the rights to it at all. It was a strange deal between Pontiac, the automobile company, and DC Comics. And my thinking was that somebody at Pontiac was a comic book fan. That's the only explanation I can think of. Because why would you use a comic book to promote a car? Why would you promote a medium that at the time was selling in the tens of thousands when you need to move 100,000 cars to make any money? So I never quite got it. They turned to me. I don't know why. They probably asked 16 other writers who said go to hell. And they turned to me, and I was like, I like car stories. I actually like writing car chases in comics, even though car chases in comics really don't make any sense. And so they put it together, and it was fun to write. And I remember bringing Black Canary in. I believe they asked me to bring Black Canary in because they wanted a connection to the DCU and not just to exist in its own universe. But I don't think they were up for bringing Batman or any of the other high-level characters. They didn't value their new relationship with Pontiac to that degree. And I don't know if these things were given away at dealerships or not. I mean, it didn't do that well in comic shops because nobody knew what the hell it was. And, it didn't get ordered very high. I can only assume that Pontiac bought a lot of copies. Because in a lot of cases where you have a licensed thing, a toy tie-in or movie tie-in or TV tie-in, the manufacturer or the studio buy a lot of copies to give away, to spread around for promotion. So the only thing I can imagine is that's what they did. I know they featured it. Pontiac had like a monthly magazine, and they did a feature article about it. But I never learned, what the distribution was like. Did they have a stack of these at every Pontiac dealership? So is Pontiac even around anymore? I don't think so. This might be one of the reasons. So anyway, remember, no ads from now on. And I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank you all for watching and subscribing and liking and spreading the word. And since I'm not going to have any more ads, I don't think Google's going to promote me as much as if they were promoting me at all before. Since they're not making any money out of this, they're not going to be spreading the word. It's up to you, my friends. Spread the word. I mean, you probably know people who would enjoy, this channel, enjoy asking questions, getting their questions answered. And why not let them know? And you can help me. We can do this together, you and me. Make this a worthwhile endeavor. So that's it for me for this week. And I will see you all down the road.